I was a nosy kid. So, there would be some things that I would overhear or some things that, I would go looking and, see and stuff like that. And so I think that really changed my outlook on like my dad and my relationship with my dad, I would say. Kind of like the typical sister relationship when we were growing up. We fought a lot more than we had like, good times, happy times. It literally wasn't until I moved out for college where we actually started building like a pretty good relationship.
Okay.
I've tried to make strides towards like doing better as far as like communicating my feelings and why I felt that way, but that's definitely something that, I grew up learning. Like we just kind of
sweep it under the rug.
Just let it fly by, let whatever emotions, sit or whatever, but never actually talk about it so that obviously like the situation doesn't happen again.
Do you think that, because you mentioned you were a daddy's girl, do you think at all from when you were really, really young up until maybe to your current age now, do you notice any type of transition or shift between maybe you were closer with one parent and then as you got older you switched to the other?
I definitely feel like it was probably like once things started happening, I started noticing, like I was the oldest. My mom, she never like put pressure on me or like told me the stuff that like her and my dad were like going through.
Sure.
But I was a nosy kid. So, there would be some things that I would overhear or some things that, I would go looking and, see and stuff like that. And so I think that really changed my outlook on like my dad and my relationship with my dad, I would say.
Okay. So based on some of the things that were going on with them, you sort of naturally started to shift over to getting closer with mom. Okay. And then also you said with your younger sister. So like, what's that relationship dynamic like between you and her?
Oh my God. Like kind of like the typical sister relationship when we were growing up. We fought a lot more than we had like, good times, happy times. It literally wasn't until I moved out for college where we actually started building like a pretty good relationship.
Okay.
Right now, that's my girl. Like since we've gotten older, we've definitely, thankfully, we've addressed a little bit of, like our issues back in the day. Like I know, even though it's like, when you're young, you don't necessarily see the harm in the things that you may like say to people.
Sure.
But it took a lot of reflection for me where I would like think about it randomly, like, and I would call her and I'm like, dang, Taylor, I'm sorry. Taylor is her name.
Okay. What's up, Taylor?
But I would just say, dang, Taylor, like, I'm thinking about the stuff that I used to say, like when I would mess with you and things like that. And I literally would just apologize. I'm sorry for, the way that I would treat you or the way that I would joke. Because there would be often times where she would ask like me not to joke with her like that or not to call her certain names and things like that. But I was young. I wasn't very emotionally intelligent. Like I did not care.
Sure.
And now, she's just built up such a tough exterior. So when I had that conversation with her, she was like, okay, like that's fine. I don't know what you're talking about or whatever, but we're good. And I'm like, okay, but I just still, want you to know
Absolutely.
that, I'm thinking about this and I'm feeling bad about this. And although we're in a better place, like I still want to make sure that she knows that, I recognize like the wrongdoing, in the past, and I want to kind of like make up for it, which I feel like I have. So
No, I agree. And I appreciate you sharing that. I think for a lot of people, like, to me, what you were saying is that you kind of get more awareness and insight, and then you naturally maybe want to apologize or reconcile some things that maybe were inappropriate, but you didn't recognize at the time, right? I think that to me is really important because that's a part of having self-accountability. Like sometimes people do us wrong or we do others wrong, and then I'm not going to say like as a society we do this, but I think for a lot of us it's kind of difficult to understand the need and the appreciation of offering that to somebody. Even when you were explaining that with how your sister received that, it sounded like she almost didn't know how to receive that. Like maybe I got so guarded that I kind of put it to the side and tried to like forget that it happened or ignored it or blocked it out or whatever, which we may do at times because of emotional pain. So when you're kind of bringing it up, it's like, oh, I'm not even trying to deal with that anymore. And you're kind of being that vessel to make me have to think about it again.
Yeah.
But what you said, sounded very genuine. You're coming from a real place. Like, I genuinely realized I was wrong when I said X, Y, and Z to you, and I just want you to know that I'm sorry. Is that at all like kind of how you think she was interpreting that, or how she was dealing with it?
Yeah, and I just think I've tried for years to kind of like make sense of just the way, that she goes about things and stuff like that. And my mom and I always joke with her with just how she's not a hard person. She is a loving, she is a genuine, she's a warm person, but she does like let a lot of things just roll off her back and just, kind of goes off the sense of, well, it is what it is and things like that. And so my mom and I would always joke with her, like, girl, like, it's not always, it is what it is. It's not always that type of, it's not always that cut and dry and stuff like that. But I can't even necessarily try to attribute to like what has, caused her to be that way. But I definitely feel as though like it, it has been, I don't know, maybe difficult for her to make sense of those emotions. So like when, like I am the emotional sister. She is more so the, kind of like tough on the exterior and things like that. So sometimes it is a little hard for her to make sense of that.
No, and that makes sense. I mean, I think for a lot of us, it's, at least in my experience, it's just sometimes we're not used to being able to have that space to really deal with those things. Yeah. Right. Like I'll just speak from my own perspective. Me and my older sister. So I have an older sister. I'm the younger one. So we're 4.5 years off. And I remember like we also didn't get along a lot, but I think it's more just because like she was a girl, I was a boy. And also like being older and younger, I think it naturally is probably difficult, similar to what you said, but I think more so because we're also different. But the point I was trying to make was when you come up in certain environments where people maybe don't always have that accountability, or you don't hear things like, I'm sorry, when you feel like something was done to you that did sort of violate your privacy, your trust, your confidence, your whatever, your wishes. But when you get used to not hearing that, maybe after a while, you just sort of become accustomed to it, right? We're all kind of creatures of habit. Yeah. So maybe she kind of got used to it just being like, even to say that expression, like it is what it is. It's like, well, I'm kind of indifferent. Like I don't want it to be this way, but maybe I've had to deal with it this way for so long that I understand that it's not really going to change. Yeah. Even though I wanted it to.
Yeah. And like you saying that just kind of sparked like a memory for me, just because now that I'm kind of like thinking of it and I'm kind of like doing a fast track of my childhood, but I know that this is something that I've talked about before, just the fact that, we as a family as a whole, unless it was something that like either like my sister and I, like if we got in trouble or something like at school, or we were, obviously doing something that we weren't supposed to do, sure. We got in trouble, we got grounded, this, that, and the third. But there were often times where like, we would get the silent treatment. So like our mom would literally just, we would know that she's mad because she's not, acting in like the, nice and playful way that she usually is. But we would get like the silent treatment a lot. And then, stuff would happen, like time would go by and things would just go back to normal. So we never actually had like conversations about like, okay, well, and I wish I could think of something specific when I was living in the house to like pinpoint, but I do remember that was something that we would do. And even I picked up on that because I remember when we were all, living together, like in COVID, when me and my sister had come down and just stayed with my parents for a while, like I would notice I would get an attitude about something that, they would say or do or whatever. And I would just, kind of stick to myself and not necessarily like address the problem. Right. And eventually, like I've tried to make strides towards like doing better as far as like communicating my feelings and why I felt that way. But that's definitely something that, I grew up learning. Like we just kind of
sweeping under the rug.
Just let it fly by, let whatever emotions, sit or whatever, but never actually talk about it, so that obviously like the situation doesn't happen again.
Absolutely. I need to emphasize that point because you made a really, really good point. I want to make sure the audience caught that point. Because essentially what you just said was, even when things were going on that we knew something was wrong, it was like we kind of had this way of behaving where everybody just kind of maybe walked on eggshells because we don't know when we're going to address that thing, if we're going to address that thing. Mm-hmm. So we just kind of pretend like we don't see each other. Mm-hmm. We ignore that we're physically in the same space.
Yeah.
I talk a lot about, in terms of boundaries, talking about confrontation. Mm-hmm. A lot of people struggle with confrontation because it requires you to assert how you feel and then be willing to actually verbalize that to somebody.
Yeah, even now, I still have kind of an issue with confrontation. It's not like it's definitely something that I would say I've started working on as of maybe like a year and a half ago, like towards probably like the beginning of I want to say like end of 2021, like beginning of last year. I'd say like that's something that I'm now trying, and even like to this day, like I still struggle with it because it's, I don't know, tough conversations
it's hard when you grew up that way. Mm-hmm. Actually, do us a favor real quick. Remind us how old you are.
I'm 25.
Okay.
Wait, no, I'm 26. I just had a birthday.
Okay. Well, happy birthday, by the way.
Thank you.
Okay, so 26. So let's think about this. So you're saying you grew up a certain kind of way where you specifically mentioned the phrase silent treatment. Mm-hmm. So why do people do that? That's basically like I'm ignoring you, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe I'm really pissed off. I'm really upset, whatever it may be, but I'm going to purposely not acknowledge you because you hurt me, whatever, right? I don't want to go much deeper than that. Why is that so destructive? Because if we're walking around and acting like these things don't bother us, we know they do, right? Because people feel body language.
Yep.
Right? You speak a lot, even when you're not speaking. Mm-hmm. So I know something's wrong, but you don't want to address it. How are we supposed to move forward? Okay? And then what's the second part to what Sierra just said? Then we pretend like nothing happened. Mm-hmm. That's where the phrase sweeping under the rug comes from. Yep. It's as if nothing actually transpired and we're going to get back to normal, except it's not normal. Mm-mm. Because now, whether we talk about it or not, we're actually building resentment towards that person. Yep. Because you're actually letting this laundry list of issues build. Mm-hmm. The more we don't actually talk about it, the more it's allowed to kind of aggregate and grow, to the point where sometimes we blow up on each other. Yep. Because it's just a matter of time. It's like a volcano that's kind of getting ready to erupt over time, Mm-hmm. You give it some time, it's going to get to that point. Yeah. Do you think, or have you witnessed that at all in your family where it would get to that point, or is it more just everybody just stayed out of each other's way for an extended period of time?
I'd say it didn't, and I don't necessarily think that it's gotten to a point where it's blown up or like boiled over or anything like that. I will say it wasn't until I started like seeking like therapy for myself. We're in 2023, so I want to say maybe like 5 or 6 years ago. Okay. It wasn't until then where like I actually started trying to have these conversations with my parents. Like I remember it was right after, because I was seeing a therapist at the University Counseling Center. Okay. And we had started touching on, just issues that had happened. And, I literally got in the car and I called my mom and I just like busted out crying, just telling her like everything that we had just discussed. Back then, like I didn't necessarily have the relationship with my father that I wanted. Mm-hmm. And so just all of that just started like pouring out to the point where like she would call my dad on three-way and we just tried to have like this, come to Jesus type meeting or, just a conversation. Sure, just because it didn't necessarily, I would say it I would say it probably like blew up or like boiled over, but not in the sense of like, it didn't come out of like anger or anything. It was just, I was just tired and just, it was a lot that I was dealing with and a lot that I had going on. And I just had to sit down with the both of them and just kind of try to let it all hang out. And even then, like, even to this day, like, we still have conversations just about not necessarily just that with like experiencing the silent treatment, but just like the way that, you know, we all communicate with each other. And I think it's because my sister and I are getting better at communicating our feelings in the way that we feel. I'm not gonna lie to you, my parents, they still, you know, they're older, they stuck in their ways.
there's generational challenges for sure.
Yeah, so I think it's because like my sister and I are trying to do a little bit better as far as like pulling that out of them. It's getting a little bit better, but it is still a very long process, I would say.
Absolutely. And again, I appreciate you for sharing that. I think there's a lot of us out there that go through those experiences precisely because of the generational gap. I remember I was talking about with another gentleman something similar. I like to touch on a lot about parenting in my clinical practice, and then just me being mindful of myself. I have an 11-year-old son, and I think about like my experience a lot growing up and all the things that I kind of knew was wrong, but obviously I was never allowed to say that, and I was never allowed to challenge. I was never allowed to confront. I was never allowed to assert how I felt. I had zero autonomy, like zero. And I realized like how much that bothered me. I was like always very curious. I always wanted to know why things were the way they were, why I had to follow certain rules, like what was the justification? And I grew up primarily with my dad. And so he just was like, hey man, it is what it is. So you can take it or leave it. And so I recognized that that was really difficult for me, and I never really liked that as a child, and even as I got older. So I'm very conscious and very mindful to not replicate that with my son. So I try to keep more of an open-ended dialogue. So if like you want to know something, I'll talk to you about it. You know, if you're curious about something, let's discuss it. If you feel some kind of way, let's share. Because I know what happens just from my clinical work with people is, and it can always show up differently. It can manifest in different ways. Some people will get really upset and they might get angry and they might get into a fight, or they might abuse substances, or they might, you know, whatever they choose to do. Some people, they internalize all of that pain. So they end up taking it out on themselves.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Which is equally bad. We don't want people to do this. The point that I feel like you're trying to make, and you correct me if I'm wrong, is we don't want those things to just sit there and bubble underneath the surface. If you want a closer relationship with somebody, you have to be willing to actually share with them how you feel, and you want to feel like that will be received. Not that they're always going to agree, not that you're not going to have different viewpoints, right? Because we're allowed to see things differently than each other.
Yeah.
But give me the space to actually articulate how I feel.
Yes.
Don't berate me, belittle me, or invalidate me because I want to share. Allow me to share, and then we can have different viewpoints.
Yes, most definitely.
What do you think about that?
I agree with that 100%. And I'll go back to what you were saying as far as like, you know, the experience that you had growing up with like just not really having that autonomy, not being able to necessarily like ask questions or, you know, question anything like that. And that just makes me think about just, I feel like that's pretty standard when it comes to just kind of like, I know personally for me, and just kind of like the majority of the African American households, like, you know, you ask why, oh, it's because I said so. Don't question this, don't question that, because, you know, it's going to be seen as disrespect. So it's you know, you grow up literally just following the rules, never questioning anything. Yeah, just, you know, letting it go with the flow, even though it may be something that you're not necessarily comfortable with, or, you know, you want clarification, not necessarily to challenge something, just so that you can understand like, you know, the situation that you're in or what you're about to do, you know, or why you can't do something. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
No, and I appreciate that. That's something that took me like the longest time in therapy, like to really, like when we were talking about confrontation, right? That was really hard for me. Like I'm seeing where I'm at now today, like I wish I could have told my younger self that, because I had none of that confidence whatsoever. I was like, my dad's a pretty intimidating dude. He's a big guy, was in the Navy, so he was a black man and militarized, so he was very much about structure and order. Discipline was very high. Corporal punishment was the norm, even on a heightened level. And so I talk a lot about that, especially to other parents, to try to understand, like, you know, a lot of the things that we do, again, a lot of people, most of us are creatures of habit, so we kind of replicate whatever we experience. For example, if I grew up and I was beat as the primary way of punishing me for whatever I did, right? If I don't do the necessary work that I need to do, there's a high probability I'm going to do that unto my own children.
Yep.
Not because I liked it. I could have hated it the whole time, but it's just, that's what I know.
Yep.
So we tend to do what we know until you get challenged and do something different.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that statement?
I agree with that 100%. And I feel like that's why it's so important to seek out outside services, just so that you can, not even necessarily like, well, I'm always an advocate for therapy, but it doesn't even necessarily like have to be that in the beginning, but just like surrounding yourself with like different people who come from different backgrounds and things like that, just so that you're not always surrounded by the same people who come from the same place, who have the same like mindsets and things like that. Because like you said, it's very important to kind of challenge those thoughts, because if you don't have any sort of, you know, outside sources or anything like that, like you're going to think that, you know, some things that are, you know, fundamentally not okay, you're going to think that those things are okay.
Oh, absolutely. I would tell me and my cousin it's funny, but it's sad at the exact same time. And I talk about that a lot too. Like we can hold two feelings at the same time. Especially when you're talking about punishments, right? In the Black community in particular, because I was raised predominantly by my father. My mom passed away when I was really young. And so me and my cousin would joke about that. And it's kind of twisted when you think about it. And we used to joke with him when it would happen to him. When you would, I don't know if you had this experience, but I'm just going to share mine. When we would hear each other, either hear of a beating that we got or hear it while it's happening outside, we would laugh. You know, we would laugh at them. We would laugh while it's happening, kind of clown them afterwards. And it's kind of a strange form of trauma bonding that we would do afterwards as we've gotten older, because we'll look back at it kind of like a nostalgic, pseudo positive sense, but we know we didn't like it. And it's interesting because I think we're the community that experiences that the most. I don't think most other cultural groups really do that. And it's a unique kind of like trauma that we impose on each other. Not us as the children, obviously, right? Like we're just subject to it. Yeah. But the parents. And again, going just to make sure I'm making this point, I'm not necessarily putting all the onus only on them too, because they're also prisoners of the time that they were from and what was done to them. A lot of times our parents are beat, which is why, again, that's why they do it to us.
Yeah.
But at some point it has to change, right? And when you're going through it, you don't like it. So I try to hold that on one hand, like understanding part of them may have been victims of their times, right? But then the other part of me as a therapist, as a man, and as a dad is like, man, we got to do better though. Like I can't just accept that. I can't just be like, well, it wasn't modeled for me, so I'm just going to regurgitate that back onto you. Sorry, son. Like I can't do that. That just fundamentally conflicts with who I am inside. So at some point, to what you were saying, I have to be willing to challenge my viewpoint and recognize that doesn't have to be the only way. So let me take it just one step further. This is a question I would ask, like I would get a lot of moms. In my clinical practice, I get a lot of moms because they're bringing their sons. So one of the questions I would ask them is like, and we've already established that like beating is the main way of punishment. So I'm like, what does that accomplish when you do that? What are you trying to achieve? What's the objective? And then, you know, they'll just say like, you know, I just want to let them know that ain't cool. You can't do that. Right? And then what I try to offer to them, because I've really spent a lot of time trying to understand the impact that it had on me and my older sister, because we talk about it a lot. And I think, number one, it doesn't create safety or security, which is absolutely necessary in a relationship of any kind. Kid, partner, friendship, whatever. You need safety and security. You got to know that I don't feel like I'm in threat by merely being in your presence. Yeah. Right? Then I need to trust that I can be honest with you. If we want to have a real relationship, right? I have to trust that I can be honest with you and tell you actually how I think, not in a disrespectful way, but I can actually articulate and express what I mean. Right? And so, and then to your other point, if I want to understand why things are the way that they are and you shut me down, that doesn't help foster good communication, because you're kind of telling me maybe, I don't really care what you think. You know? Yeah. You don't need to know any of this stuff. Just listen to what I told you. And so I like to package sort of all of that together and just emphasize the point. You can do that as the parent, okay? But understand what you're doing in the long term. if you want, this is my selfish goal. I want to be the kind of parent that your kid wants to come back to you when they're older and they have real stuff they want to talk about and they actually want to know what you think.
Yep.
And they want your perspective and they want your feedback. Dad, I don't know what to do in the situation, but I trust you. What do you think I should do? Like, I consider that the highest honor that you could have.
Yeah.
But you can't have that. You're sort of sabotaging yourself inadvertently. If you put that type of conditions on them when they're growing up, why would you think they would want to come to you and talk to you about anything?
Yeah. And they don't realize it. And then like when, you know, the time comes when the kids like become older, they're able to, you know, think for themselves, you know, they go through situations like that. And then they act so confused when they're like, okay, well, if you were going through this, like, why didn't you come to me? I mean, 9 times out of 10, it's because they didn't feel comfortable enough.
If I had a mirror, I'd be like, put the mirror on right there and ask that question again. Why didn't you come to me?
Yeah.
Maybe because this is how you treated me. What do you mean, why didn't I come to you? If I came to you anytime I was scared and you told me to stop being scared, you didn't explain anything. You didn't make me feel safe. You just told me stop being scared. If I tried to tell you what I was worried about, if I wanted to tell you something that I was excited for or hope or dream of mine, and you were just like, blah.
Okay, like that's what you're supposed to, like. I experienced that a lot with when I was working with adolescents in my previous job. You know, they were kids. They went through stuff and they made a lot of dumb mistakes and things like that.
Sure.
And I think it's, you know, their parents, of course, they get tired of trying to, you know, make excuses and things like that. But it's also just, you know, kind of the way that they would approach things. And, you know, sometimes kids can exaggerate and things like that. But when it
absolutely they can. Absolutely.
When it comes to like the basis of things, you know, I don't have, you know, any kids of my own, but just hearing the things that they would say as far as, you know, even when, because I worked at a behavioral health agency, so a lot of my kids dealt with like substance use and mental health. And so, you know, good things would happen as far as like, you know, my kid being sober for 30 days or them, you know, attending like all of their group sessions and things like that. And so I had one specifically. She was one of my last clients, and she, you know, told me how like she had been getting good grades. She had been testing negative for all substances for a minute. And so like, she, you know, she tried to bring, you know, that type of good news. It's not even anything bad, not even trying to, you know, figure stuff out with her mom. But even like when, you know, you bring good news to your parents, and she was like, okay, well, I mean, what do you want me to do about it?
Cookie?
Yeah. And so she was like, well, miss, like, I don't see the point in continuing to like try to do better or try to, you know, do this, that, and the third, when not even like my own mom is going to be here to, support me and acknowledge it. Like, you know, obviously she went through some stuff and she did some things. And so of course, like, you know, a parent is going to get tired of, you know, the stuff that, you know, their kid does because they want the best for them. But it's, I don't know. I just also feel like it's important, just no matter how small it is, to, you know, continue to encourage your kids, just because I know even now, like that's some stuff that I look for now with, you know, from my parents and things like that. So
I think it's always a factor. Like if you have a pretty strong relationship with your parents, and even as you get older, I don't think it would ever not be a case where you would want to hear them say that they're proud of you, or they like the decisions that you're making, or the people that you surround yourself with. I think that that's just inherent to being the parent-child relationship. I think we would all desire that. What I will submit is what can happen when you don't have that type of relationship, which is, to go back to your phrasing, the silent treatment. That's like me and my father. We don't really have a relationship because there's a lack of accountability and acknowledgement for what was done. And we can't move forward as men, as adults, if you can't acknowledge when you do things that are inappropriate, whether you think you're wrong or not, right? Any relationship, I'll always make this point. Every relationship is about two people and how they choose to see it. And everybody doesn't have the same viewpoint. So I can be looking at it and say, you did me wrong. And you could be saying, I don't understand. Help me understand, right? But if you attack them and say, no, you're wrong and I didn't do that to you, you're essentially creating this antagonistic relationship that we have. We have to be in opposition to each other all the time.
Yep.
Because you're not allowing me to actually feel.
Yep.
You don't allow me to actually speak my truth and what I've experienced to you. So it doesn't mean you're like the worst parent ever. What I'm saying is it impacts that potential for a long-term, loving, warm relationship that you could have.
Yep.
Right? And then if you silo that for one moment, on the flip side, when it comes to relationship building as you become an adult, it's going to be impacted based on what you experience with your family. So if I'm a young lady, for example, I can imagine if I don't have that type of relationship with my father, it's going to be somewhat more difficult for me to deal with men.
Yeah.
If I want to pursue men, it's going to be difficult because I didn't get a good example of what that should look like with my father. Would you agree with that statement?
Heck yeah, I'm dealing with it now.
Okay.
Yeah, it's definitely been difficult, and I don't like using the term like daddy issues because I don't like the way that it sounds. But yeah, I have finally like noticed and recognized how much like my relationship with my father and the experiences that I had growing up have definitely affected like what I look for in relationships, what I tolerate in relationships, how I as a person like act and move in relationships. It definitely has. It's been difficult. So yeah.
And I know we're gonna get into that in a little while. But yeah, I'd like to make that point because to me, regardless of the purpose of understanding who's in the house is because that shapes our initial reality, because perception is reality, right? So if I have my parents there, or I have a parent there, we can also speak about one parent because that's obviously my lived experience. If that one parent that I do have and we don't have a good relationship, that's going to make it very difficult for me to formulate strong bonds with other people outside of my house.
Yeah.
Because think about that for a second from the kid's perspective. The people that produced me don't have the energy, the time, or the patience to like allow me to exist the way that I want to share the way that I want to advocate for myself the way that I want to. They will not allow me that space.
Yeah.
Think about that for a second. If you're the child, right? Then you get older. Then you want to date. You want to get a boyfriend. I want to get a girlfriend. You want to get married and have a husband. I want to get married and have a wife. Why would I assume that any man or woman would want to give me that space? If my own mom wouldn't do it, if my own dad wouldn't do it, why would I presume that anybody else out there would want to say, yeah, I'm genuinely going to be there for you longer than the first month or the first 6 months? And I'm going to give you that space because I believe that you deserve that. And I've never felt that I've deserved it because I've never been offered it to me my entire life.